Hi, everyone, and thank you for taking time to listen to today's weather discussion for March 10th, 2015. We have a lot to talk about, including potential big changes to the pattern in the 11 to 15 time frame, as well as a major spring warm up in the first part of the forecast discussion. So let's jump right into it. Here's a quick overview of what we'll be looking at. So for week one, we'll be looking at a warm up. There will be a transitionary period where there could be both warm and cold days, and that pattern change will be complete by the middle part of March, and this colder and stormier pattern might even last into mid-April. And I'll give a few reasons as to why that could be the case. So first, let's talk about the warm-up. We have a lot of model agreement, and it's fairly close, so there's high confidence that this warm-up will in fact happen, and already is in fact happening in many locations across the mid-Atlantic into the Northeast. You see temperatures getting to the 50s in the southern parts of the mid-Atlantic and into the 40s in Pennsylvania and New Jersey as highs on Thursday. You can see in New England it does stick around into the 30s though, so the warm-up, it is warmer than what it was recently, but certainly to say that there's a thaw in New England, we'll have to wait, unfortunately, until more sustained and more potent spring-like temperatures do indeed try to show up. So let's take a look at the 500 millibar height anomaly for days 1 through 5. It's very persistent. We have a large-scale ridge across most of the continental United States, and this is largely due to troughing in Alaska and troughing in Greenland, and there's nothing stopping the Pacific air from just flooding the entire country and providing above average temperatures for the 1 to 5 time frame. So the question is this the true end of winter, or will winter make some sort of a comeback towards the end of March? We'll take a look at that first by looking at current sea surface temperatures. You can see that the current sea surface temperatures in the Pacific reflect a very positive Pacific decadal oscillation, that very signature horseshoe-like pattern of warmer than normal water in the Pacific. And warmer water in the Pacific actually does tend to correlate with ridging into Alaska and the western portions of the United States. So this right here is an observation that supports that a trough in Alaska will probably be short-lived, as warmer than normal temperatures along the west coast tends to favor ridging there as opposed to troughing. We can also look at the ENSO, the tropical Pacific sea surface temperatures, which correspond to ENSO anomalies as well. You can see that the highest anomalies are actually in the west over here, and the cooler than normal anomalies are in the east. This is actually exactly the opposite of what you would expect for a sustained warmer than normal March in the east. In fact, March 2012 featured a March that was not only warmer than normal, but it was warmer than normal throughout the entire month of March, and this sea surface temperature depiction was completely the opposite as what is being depicted right here, right now. So taking a look at March 2012 sea surface temperatures, you can see that in the northern Pacific we had a cold horseshoe in the northern Pacific, indicating a negative Pacific decadal oscillation with a warm bubble just to the north of Hawaii. In addition, the sea surface temperatures in the southern Pacific were reversed as well. You can see this if we compare current sea surface temperatures to what they were like in a warm March. Therefore, we can infer that since current sea surface temperatures are markedly different in the Pacific than what we saw during a warm March, therefore it is not unreasonable to suggest that this March will be very different than what we saw in a very warm March in 2012. One example of this and an indicator is that a very anomalous MJO wave is forecasted. You can see this with both the GEFS and the European. The MJO is forecast to even go off the chart on the GEFS, and while it's not going off the chart on the European, you can see it's very, very anomalous, getting to an amplitude between 3 and 4 on the European, which indicates a very potent amount of upward motion in the Western Pacific. And this upward motion will propagate eastward into the Western Hemisphere and Africa by around the 20th or so. And when you start to get into phases 8, 1, and 2, that's when you start to favor colder than normal temperatures in the east. Phases 7, though, favors a lot of ridging into Alaska, and that would in turn favor a lot of low level cold in the east. You can see this as well with the UK Met and the Canadian, large in agreement with the American and European models, indicating a very robust wave into phase 7, possibly lingering into phase 8. So another way we can look at this is with 200 millibar vertical velocities. The greens indicate vertical motion upward, and the oranges indicate vertical motion downward, indicating sinking air. So you would expect cloud cover to form in this area where it's green, and you would expect cloud cover not to form where there is sinking air in the oranges and reds. So you can see that the MJO wave is forecasted to progress eastward all the way until it gets to Indonesia once again into phase 5. In fact, you could see the dates as well for when this is forecasted. You can see that the MJO is forecasted to get to our area, the longitude of our area, that is, by around the middle of March, by the 23rd or so. And this phase of the MJO would favor colder than normal temperatures in the east. And only when we get to phase 5 in April does this suggest that this colder than normal pattern will abide and a more sustained above average temperature regime will take over. We can see this as well when we look at phase 7 and phase 8 MJO composites in March. You can see a lot of ridging into Alaska with the phase 7 MJO composite, and the stronger the MJO wave, the stronger this ridging will consequently be. And therefore, the stronger this ridging is, the more this southeast ridge will be suppressed, and the more low-level cold will be able to entrench itself into the east. You can see once again the MJO wave in phase 7 is forecast to be extremely anomalous, suggesting that this ridging will be more anomalous than what's depicted here. Phase 8 indicates colder than normal temperatures with a negative AO and NAO, and even some ridging along the west coast. So once we get into April, you can see that phases 1 and 2 are still pretty cold across the east. You can see we have a horseshoe in phase 1 and a positive PNA phase 2. And you can see that when we look at the vertical velocity charts, phase 1 and 2 corresponds roughly to early April when the MJO wave is starting to propagate across Africa into the Indian Ocean. So this colder than normal weather pattern looks to persist from middle March, possibly into early and middle parts of April. So for day 6 and 10 is when this transition will occur. You can see that the ridging will persist, but you can see there's a little bit of troughing indicated by the downward bending of heights across the east coast. Therefore, we could have some cooler days in the mix and a potential storm system as well, but I'll get to that in a second. In the 11 to 15, however, we have a big reversal with the weather pattern. You can see a very, very meridional weather pattern indicating ridging into Alaska, ridging into Greenland, and troughing into the east. This suggests a very cold and possibly quite stormy pattern in the east. This does not guarantee big snowfalls. However, this does increase the chance of snowfalls in the 11 to 15 time frame. It is still possible for us to get snowfalls in later March and has been observed many times historically. And we can even get snows in the mid-Atlantic and northeastern states into the early parts of April as well. So going into snow, so we have one storm system that is showing up on most models into the 15th. There is a lot of uncertainty with this still. Really depends on how far north the storm system gets and how far south an area of high pressure associated with the PNA spike can get as well. This will depend on how far south the 0C850 isotherm and surface isotherm will be able to get. As I mentioned before, the chances for snow should continue with a more favorable pattern developing day 10 and beyond into the early parts of April. And after that, if the cold and stormy pattern does continue, it'll be very hard to get snow threats, and it'll just be a very cold and very dreary pattern until mid-April, when it should reverse and become a milder and more dry pattern. So the zero-Z GFS shows this storm threat for the 15th quite nicely. You can see here's our high pressure system to the north providing the northerly flow, the cold air advection. And you can see that Boston gets a lot of snow from this verbatim. The question is, how far south does this high pressure get, and how far north does this wave of low pressure get? Since this is 144 hours out, there is still considerable amounts of uncertainty with regard to how exactly everything will be placed. And this will change many, many times. And the final solution has been far from determined with this storm system.